Jessica Moore had just given birth. She worked until 38 weeks pregnant, never missed a deadline, never called out sick. She gave everything to her company and trusted the law to protect her when she stepped away for maternity leave. Under the Family and Medical Leave Act, FMLA, she was entitled to 12 weeks of unpaid leave. She took 9. When she returned, her email password no longer worked. Her desk had been cleared out. HR told her, "The company restructured while you were gone." She was let go for performance realignment. No warning, no severance, no legal recourse. Daniel Torres was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at 29. His job as a retail team leader became harder, so he requested a modified schedule and reduced physical tasks, just as allowed under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. The company said they'd accommodate. 3 weeks later, they cut his hours to near zero, then fired him for inconsistent attendance due to medical appointments they had pre-approved. Daniel filed a complaint. The response? "We complied with all applicable laws." He lost his job, his insurance, his income. These are not rare stories. They are systemic outcomes caused not by rogue employers, but by laws written with loopholes, interpreted by corporations, and rarely enforced. In America, you can follow every rule, invoke every protection, and still be fired for being human. For having a baby, for becoming sick, for caring for your dying parent, for surviving cancer, for being disabled, for being a woman. Jessica and Daniel were not exploited in the shadows. They were failed in full daylight while believing the system was built to protect them. But U.S. labor law isn't built for protection. It's built for plausible deniability. We are taught that laws like FMLA and ADA safeguard workers. But here's what they don't tell you. FMLA only applies if your company has 50-plus employees and you've worked 1,250 hours in the past year. It provides no pay, no guarantee of the same role upon return. ADA accommodations are at the employer's discretion, and retaliation is hard to prove. Millions believe they're protected. Most are not. Let that sink in. Jessica didn't take extra time off. She followed the law exactly. Daniel didn't demand special treatment. He asked for minimal support, legally guaranteed. Both were fired. Both were told it's legal, and they were left to pick up the pieces. This episode is not just about 2 people. It's about millions who are punished for using the very protections they're told they have. It's about the myth that U.S. labor law is worker-friendly. It's about how being sick, pregnant, or vulnerable can get you fired, with zero consequences for the employer. In this final episode of System Fails, we uncover how labor laws meant to shield the vulnerable are often toothless, exploitable, and weaponized by companies to quietly push people out. We'll expose the hidden ways. HR uses soft terminations to avoid lawsuits. Employers reclassify leaves as performance gaps. Legal protections are ignored because enforcement is rare and delayed. And we'll ask, if the law doesn't protect you when you need it most, what good is the law at all? Powerline Stories presents Fired While Protected, How U.S. Labor Law Fails the Most Vulnerable. Jessica Moore was the kind of employee every manager wanted. Always early, always smiling, always reliable. She worked as a senior marketing coordinator at a mid-sized firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. 6 years of promotions, praise, and perfect performance reviews. Never once did she take a sick day longer than 48 hours. She even handled the company's social media during holidays. When Jessica learned she was pregnant, she was ecstatic. It wasn't easy. She and her husband had tried for 3 years. The pregnancy was smooth, and she kept working up to her 38th week. Every morning, she showed up with her laptop and her lunch, even while fighting through back pain and swollen feet. Her co-workers joked that she might give birth in the office. Her manager told her, "Don't worry, Jess. Take the time you need. You've earned it." Jessica had done her research. She qualified under the Family and Medical Leave Act, FMLA, for up to 12 weeks of job-protected, unpaid leave. So she filed the paperwork. HR approved. Everything seemed in order. She gave birth to a healthy baby girl, Amelia. But just 3 weeks into maternity leave, she received a cryptic email. "We've reassigned your client portfolio temporarily to support team delivery." Then, silence. She wrote back, asking if everything was okay. No reply. At week 6, she called HR to confirm her return date. "We're still finalizing some restructuring," they told her vaguely. At week 9, she came back. That's when she learned the truth. Her login was disabled. Her desk was cleaned out. Her name removed from all internal directories. The HR director sat her down and handed her a form. "Your position has been eliminated. It's not personal. It's restructuring." No written warning, no discussion, just erased. She asked, "But I have FMLA protection. I followed the rules." The HR rep replied, "We fully complied with FMLA. Your leave was approved, but the law doesn't guarantee the same role when you return. It only guarantees a job, and unfortunately, your position no longer exists." That's when it hit her. Jessica wasn't protected. She was vulnerable. She tried to fight it. She called the Department of Labor. They opened a case. 6 months passed. They said the company had followed the minimum requirement. There would be no lawsuit, no ruling, no reinstatement. She appealed twice. She hired a lawyer. The cost? $4,800 in legal fees. The result? Case dismissed. In the meantime, Jessica lost her health insurance. She couldn't access postpartum therapy. She drained her savings paying for baby supplies and legal bills. Her mortgage was late for the first time. Her credit score dropped by 70 points. Her self-worth collapsed, all because she trusted the system. "I thought I did everything right," she later said in an interview. "I worked hard. I earned leave. I followed the rules. But the rules aren't meant to protect people like me. They're designed to protect companies from people like me. If you go on leave, even legally, you become a liability, not openly, not on paper, but in whispers, in private meetings, in budget reviews." Jessica wasn't fired for doing anything wrong. She was fired for being absent long enough to be replaced. And the law? It said, that's okay. The most painful part wasn't the job loss. It was the realization that the very thing meant to support her, the law itself, had no spine. It protected her on paper, but not in reality. It gave her the right to leave, but not the security to return. This is how the American system treats working mothers. Work hard, get pregnant, lose your job legally. Jessica's story is one of thousands every year. And here's the kicker. Her company didn't break the law. They followed FMLA to the letter. They filed the forms. They waited. They restructured. It's not illegal. It's strategic. The American workplace sees motherhood not as a life milestone, but as a business risk. And the system, it shrugs. Most Americans believe labor laws are there to protect the vulnerable. That's what Jessica thought. That's what Daniel thought. But what if the protections are only skin deep? Let's start with the two biggest so-called protections. FMLA, Family and Medical Leave Act. ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. Enacted in 1993, the Family and Medical Leave Act was sold as a win for workers. It allows eligible employees to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid, job-protected leave for the birth of a child. Serious health conditions for you or a family member. Care for an injured service member. Certain military family needs. Sounds good, right? Here's the reality. To even be eligible for FMLA, you must have worked at least 1,250 hours in the past 12 months. Your employer must have 50 or more employees. You must have been employed there for at least 1 year. This means fall into the U.S. workforce is automatically disqualified. Part-time workers, no protection. Gig workers, forget it. Small businesses, No obligation. Jessica met those requirements. But even then, FMLA doesn't guarantee your exact job will be there when you return. It only requires employers to give you an equivalent position. But what does that mean? Same salary? Maybe. Same responsibilities? Not required. Same team? Nope. Same respect? Doubtful. And here's the kicker. Equivalent is whatever the company says it is. In Jessica's case, her position was simply gone, restructured, vanished, eliminated. Perfectly legal under FMLA. Even if you're lucky enough to qualify, you're not getting paid. In most developed countries, parental leave is paid. In the US, FMLA means you go broke for daring to be a parent. Jessica used savings to survive during maternity leave, but many workers don't even have that luxury, so they go back early, or don't take leave at all, because they can't afford to follow the law. FMLA is a right you have to buy, and most Americans simply can't. Daniel Torres believed the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, would protect him after being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Technically, it should have. The ADA, passed in 1990, prohibits discrimination based on disability and requires reasonable accommodations. But here's what Daniel learned the hard way. What's considered reasonable isn't clearly defined. It's up to interpretation, and corporations have lawyers. Daniel asked for a slightly shorter shift schedule, a transfer to a less physically demanding department, flexibility for medical appointments. The company said yes, briefly. Then they cut his hours until he couldn't survive, then fired him for performance inconsistency. Was that legal? They say yes. Proving it wasn't is on Daniel, and it's almost impossible. Let's say you're fired in violation of ADA. What now? You file a claim with the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, but backlogs are enormous. Investigations can take months, even years. Most claims are dismissed or settled quietly. Very few go to court. Even fewer win. Meanwhile, you're jobless, and if you sue and lose, you could owe legal fees. So most people give up. Like Daniel, they move on, defeated by a process designed to look fair but move slowly enough to crush you. Employers have mastered the art of legal retaliation. Soft firing, you're not terminated, you're just not needed anymore. Restructuring, your role didn't disappear, it merged. Performance reviews. Suddenly, after you request leave, your work is inconsistent. They don't need to say, "We fired you for taking leave." They just reframe your absence as a business decision, perfectly legal. Ask any labor rights expert, and they'll tell you, a right without enforcement is just a suggestion. The Department of Labor is understaffed and underfunded. Most workers don't even know how to file a claim. Employers bank on silence, fear, and confusion. Even when employers are caught breaking the law, the punishment is often a fine. A small fine. A fine cheaper than keeping the employee. So what do companies choose? They calculate the cost, and they pick the cheaper loss. We often call this a broken system, but maybe it's working exactly as intended. Protect corporations from liability. Make rights sound generous, but limit access. Shift burden of proof onto the most vulnerable. Appear legal, even when deeply unjust. Jessica and Danielle weren't exceptions. They were outcomes. The system did what it was built to do. Protect the employer, delay the worker, avoid the lawsuit. What's the point of having rights if using them costs you your job? Jessica followed the law. Daniel trusted the system. Both ended up unemployed, uninsured, and discarded. The letter of the law protected them, but the reality of the system crushed them. When we talk about wrongful termination under FMLA or ADA loopholes, we often think of individual stories, but these are never one-offs. The people who get chewed up and spat out by the system tend to share certain characteristics, traits that too often mark them as expendable in corporate eyes. Let's look at 5 groups that bear the brunt of these so-called protections. 1. Working mothers, the double bind. Jessica Moore was hardly unusual. Women comprise 57% of FMLA leave takers, and 90% of parental leave requests come from mothers. Yet the very law designed to safeguard maternity leave often becomes a weapon. Economic penalty. Unpaid leave means lost income. Single mothers or families where child support is minimal simply can't afford 12 weeks without pay. Many return early, only to face retaliation or subpar assignments. Career penalty. When they return, mothers often find their projects reassigned, career track promotions sidelined, or their roles eliminated altogether. A 2019 study by the Center for Work-Life Law found that 1 in 4 women reporting pregnancy discrimination are penalized on the job. Invisible retaliation, fired for performance, when in reality they used the leave to have a baby. That's what happened to Jessica, and to thousands more single or low-income mothers who have no fallback. Takeaway: maternity leave in America is a double bind, protected on paper, punitive in practice. Companies calculate the cost of a mother's temporary absence and decide it's cheaper to let her go. 2. People with disabilities, the reasonable accommodation, mirage. Daniel Torres believed ADA was his lifeline. In fact, under-resourced enforcement, fewer than 4% of ADA charges filed earn a cause finding by the EEOC. The rest are dismissed or settled without meaningful change. Ambiguous reasonable. The term is so loosely defined that employers often claim accommodations are undue hardship. A caseworker at a national retail chain estimated that only 15% of accommodation requests are granted fully. The rest are modified, ignored, or used as grounds for a performance write-up. Cost-benefit analysis. Corporate counsel routinely calculate that fighting a discrimination claim, or paying a small settlement, is cheaper than genuinely accommodating an employee. Daniel's firing cost the company less than providing a part-time shift. Takeaway: ADA's promise of reasonable accommodations is a mirage, often rewritten in boardrooms to protect profit margins over human rights. 3. Caregivers, the invisible workforce. Millions of Americans juggle full or part-time work while caring for elderly parents, sick spouses, or disabled children. Many rely on FMLA's family care clause, only to find co-worker. Resentment: teams view extended leave as slack. That subtle pressure forces caregivers back early, undermining their health and caregiving duties. Temporary haze. HR promises intermittent leave, but disciplines anyone using more than a few days sporadically. If you miss doctor appointments or hospice visits, you're labeled unreliable. No backup plan. Small and mid-sized companies rarely hire replacements or backfill roles. Caregivers return to chaos, unstaffed workloads, missed goals, and the perception they weren't really needed. Takeaway: FMLA's family care protections hinge on goodwill. In its absence, caregivers are punished for doing the right thing. 4. Low-wage workers, the at-will disadvantage. All the above stories involve salaried or mid-level employees. But consider at-will employment. Over 80% of U.S. workers are at-will, meaning employers can fire them for any reason, or none at all, so long as it's not explicitly discriminatory. No safety net. Minimum wage earners, fast food staff, and retail associates often lack access to FMLA. Their employers are under 50 employees, or fear speaking up because one bad shift can cost them their job. Gig economy. Rideshare, drivers, courier services, freelance contractors, none of these are covered by ADA or FMLA. When they get sick or have a baby, they simply lose all income. Takeaway. The people who can least afford job loss are the ones with the weakest or non-existent legal protections. 5. Marginalized communities, race, gender, and economic lines. Discrimination doesn't occur in a vacuum. Studies show women of color, Black and Latina women, are 1.5x more likely to be fired for requesting parental leave than white women. Economic pressure. Immigrant workers often face language barriers and fear of retaliation, making them less likely to assert FMLA or ADA rights. Intersectionality. LGBTQ+ employees, single parents, and those on public assistance are stereotyped as risky and thus quietly sidelined. Takeaway. Loopholes in labor law compound existing inequalities, leaving the most marginalized even more vulnerable. Why this matters. When a single mother loses her job for taking maternity leave, she loses health insurance, often before she regains full health. Loses retirement contributions, jeopardizing her long-term security. Loses confidence, often leaving the workforce entirely. When a disabled worker is let go for seeking accommodations, they lose their livelihood, often without the disability benefits they relied on. Face stigma, discouraging others from asking for essential modifications. Learn that legal rights mean little without enforcement. The numbers behind the pain. 3.8 million FMLA leave usages per year, but only 5,000 wage and hour cases filed. Over 75% of ADA claims don't result in meaningful job retention. 1 in 4 mothers reports maternity discrimination, 1 in 10 reports outright firing. 0 paid parental leave at the federal level. Only 15 states plus DC mandate any paid leave at all. These aren't abstract stats. They represent real people thrust into financial peril, mental health crises, and family upheaval. When labor laws exist on paper but fail in practice, the result is 1. Token compliance. Employers comply with the bare minimum, posting notices, approving paperwork, then quietly eliminate liabilities. 2. Enforcement paralysis. Government agencies lack resources to investigate every claim, so violations go unpunished. 3. Corporate immunity. Penalties for unlawful termination rarely exceed a few months of wages, easily absorbed. 4. Worker silence. Fear of job loss, legal costs, public exposure keeps most workers from fighting back. In the end, the system protects the employer, not the employee. Real change requires more than laws. Stronger enforcement. Funding for rapid investigations and real penalties. Paid leave. Guarantees. Federal paid parental and caregiving leave to remove the financial barrier. Universal protections extend FMLA and ADA-style right to all workers, including part-timers and gig workers. Anti-retaliation safeguards, steeper fines and criminal sanctions for employers who retaliate. When Jessica Moore and Daniel Torres discovered that the protections they heard about were illusory, they faced a choice: swallow their losses or fight back. Many like them chose resistance, turning private pain into public pressure. Strategic lawsuits forcing the system's hand. 1. Class actions and FMLA retaliation. Claims over the last decade, labor law attorneys have filed class action suits against national chains, grocery stores, call centers, and tech firms, alleging mass FMLA retaliation. One landmark 2018 case against a major retail brand resulted in a $28 million settlement after plaintiffs showed the company systematically terminated pregnant workers under the guise of restructuring. Though no executives were personally penalized, the payout forced the chain to revamp its leave tracking systems and train managers on non-discriminatory staffing. 2. ADA. Failure to accommodate. Lawsuits. Following Daniel's firing, several ex-employees of a regional grocery chain banded together and sued under ADA. They demonstrated that the company's stated accommodations were window dressing, policies designed to dodge real accommodations without directly violating the law. The case settled for $5.2 million, and the company agreed to hire an external aid consultant for 3 years. Yet critics note that without criminal penalties or executive accountability, corporate behavior often returns to its old ways once the settlement window closes. Grassroots movements, from water coolers to town halls. 1. Mothers Rising. Coalitions. In cities across the U.S., mothers who lost jobs under FMLA, often single parents, formed Mothers Rising chapters to share stories, coordinate legal aid, and lobby state legislatures. Their tactics included public testimonies at state labor hearings, social media campaigns with the hashtag #FiredForMotherhood, partnerships with local childcare centers to highlight economic impacts. In California, their pressure contributed to a bill expanding FMLA protections to companies with 25 or more employees, reaching an additional 500,000 workers. 2. Disability justice networks. Disabled workers fired or penalized under ADA teamed up with national disability rights groups like Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, DREDF. They staged sit-ins at corporate headquarters, demanding clear guidelines on what constitutes reasonable accommodations, faster EOC investigations under 90 days, protective orders preventing retaliation during claims. These protests forced several corporations to publicly commit to faster disability rights audits, though many activists warn that follow-through remains inconsistent. Political campaigns, turning outrage into policy. 1. State legislative wins. States like New York and Washington have passed pregnancy discrimination payback laws, requiring employers who illegally fire pregnant workers to pay triple-back wages plus attorney fees. In Washington, these statutes have generated over $35 million verdicts since 2010 and created a real deterrent. 2. Federal push. The Family Act. And ADA amendments. On the federal level, advocacy groups rallied behind the Family Act, which would create a national paid family leave insurance program funded by modest payroll contributions. While repeatedly introduced in Congress, the bill has struggled amid partisan gridlock. Similarly, efforts to pass ADA amendments clarifying reasonable accommodations definitions have stalled, despite bipartisan sponsorship. Opponents cite costs to small businesses and fear of frivolous suits. Labor advocates have also pressured the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EOC, and the Department of Labor, DOL, to beef up enforcement. Increased funding, tens of millions more per year for additional investigators. Transparency mandates, public dashboards tracking case timelines and outcomes. Whistleblower protections. Shields for employees. Who assist investigations. In 2022, a coalition of 30 advocacy groups succeeded in securing a $20 million funding boost for the EEOC, resulting in 30% faster initial case assessments. Yet litigation alone can't fix systemic design. High burden of proof. Employees must prove adverse action was directly tied to protected leave or disability, a difficult causal link when companies mask terminations as restructuring or performance issues. Cost and delay, legal fees and drawn-out cases deter many. Even winning cases can take 2-4 years, by which point plaintiffs are often broke, relocated, or demoralized. Company immunity. Corporations factor settlements into their budgets, viewing them as a cost of doing business rather than a deterrent. Beyond courts, the role of unions and worker centers. 1. Union campaigns for paid leave. In traditionally non-union sectors, healthcare, gig economy, worker centers and emerging unions have won local ordinances requiring paid leave beyond FMLA's scope. Seattle's Gig Workers Guild negotiated portable benefits for delivery drivers, guaranteeing 5 days of paid sick leave annually, regardless of classification. 2. Worker cooperatives and solidarity models. Some displaced workers have formed worker cooperatives, pooling resources and sharing ownership. For example, fired hospitality staff in Denver launched a worker-run cafe that provides on-the-job benefits, including paid leave and flexible schedules, showcasing alternative employment models. Despite victories, the movement faces persistent setbacks and political backlash. Each state advance in worker protections triggers opposition campaigns funded by business lobbies. Preemptive laws. Several states have passed laws limiting municipal paid leave ordinances, arguing one-size-fits-all statewide standards protect business predictability. Judicial roadblocks. Courts sometimes strike down local ordinances for overreach or rule narrowly on FMLA ADA definitions, rolling back gains. Yet each defeat informs tactics for the next campaign. Employees share playbooks online, and national coalitions coordinate cross-state strategy. We've seen the human cost. Now let's understand why the system stays broken, even as millions suffer. At its core, the failure of FMLA and ADA isn't an accident. It's by design, shaped by decades of political compromise, corporate lobbying, and a public that assumes the law will protect me. 1. The lobbying machine. Dollars over dignity. Insurance and corporate interests. Large corporations spent over $100 million lobbying on labor and health issues in the last 5 years alone, far eclipsing grassroots safety net advocates. They fund both major parties, ensuring FMLA ADA expansions never gain real traction. Trade associations. Groups like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the Retail Industry Leaders Association actively oppose paid leave mandates, branding them job killers. Their campaigns convince legislators that any expansion of worker rights risks economic growth. Effect. Politicians fear donor backlash. They introduce toothless amendments rather than bold reforms. FMLA and ADA receive applause in hearings, but no funding for enforcement or expansion of coverage thresholds. 2. The mirage of bipartisan compromise. Both parties voice support for family leave and disability rights. Yet, Republicans decry big government mandates that they claim will hurt small businesses. Democrats champion paid leave, but often settle for minimal funding mechanisms, e.g., voluntary employer tax credits that few companies use. The result is a series of token policies that look good in sound bites but do nothing to close real gaps. FMLA remains unpaid. ADA remains unenforced. Proposals for federal paid leave or stronger anti-retaliation measures stall or get stripped of teeth. Effect. Workers believe something has been done, so public pressure subsides. Meanwhile, no meaningful protection ever arrives. 3. The enforcement void. Even when the laws exist, enforcing them is virtually impossible. Underfunded agencies, the Department of Labor, DOL, and Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EOC, lack investigators. Case backlogs stretch 18-24 months, by which time plaintiffs have moved on or lost resources. Low penalties. Employers face fines that amount to a few weeks' wages, not enough to deter willful violations. A corporation can fire a worker, pay a $10,000 penalty, and budget that as a cost of doing business. Legal complexity. Proving retaliation or failure to accommodate requires mountains of documentation and legal expertise most workers can't afford. Effect. Laws become mere suggestions. Corporations calculate, if we deny leave or accommodation, only a tiny fraction will sue, and even fewer will win. 4. The public's false security. Many Americans overestimate their protections. Surveys show 70% believe FMLA guarantees paid leave. 65% assume ADA accommodations are easy to get. This false confidence breeds complacency. Workers don't prepare backups, document interactions, or seek preemptive legal advice because they believe the law has their back. Effect: when the law lets them down, they feel betrayed and often too demoralized to fight. 5. Cultural attitudes, stigma, and silence. Beyond politics, cultural norms reinforce the system. Ideal worker, myth. The American workplace valorizes availability and hustle. Taking leave, even legally, labels you as less committed. Shame and fear. Employees fear retaliation, gossip, or being branded difficult. They'll endure hardship rather than assert rights. Individual responsibility. We're taught to blame individuals for not reading the fine print. This cynicism discourages collective action. Effect: silence allows abuse to flourish. Workers suffer in private, while employers operate in public view with impunities. Systemic entrenchment, vested interests. The very structure of U.S. labor law reflects a bargain made in the early 1990s. Businesses got uniform rules across states. Workers got limited unpaid leave protections. Over time, that compromise calcified. States are preempted from offering stronger protections in some contexts. Federal standards set a minimum, and many states never exceed them. Even when states add paid leave laws, business lobbies push preemption clauses to block local or municipal advances. Effect: progressive state reforms are choked off. The floor never rises, the ceiling only tilts. 7. The way forward. Breaking the cycle. Understanding the forces that lock FMLA and ADA in place is the first step toward real change. Possible pathways include: 1. Elevate enforcement, fully fund dole and EEOC. Impose criminal penalties for willful retaliation. Create rapid response teams to handle urgent leave disputes. 2. Universal paid leave. Enact a national paid family and medical leave insurance program, funded by minimal payroll contributions. Ensure all workers, part-time, gig, and contract, are covered. 3. Clear, binding accommodations or define reasonable accommodation in concrete terms. Require employers to update accordance protocols annually. Penalize companies for non-compliance with per-incident fines. 4. Public accountability, mandate transparency reports from large employers on leave requests and outcomes. Publish company leave scores to inform job seekers and consumers. 5. Culture shift, champion stories of companies that successfully support working parents and disabled employees. Normalize leave-taking through media and public awareness campaigns. Final reflection. FMLA and ADA began as hopeful steps toward a fairer labor market. But over the last 3 decades, corporate power, political compromise, and public misperception have hollowed out their promise. Workers like Jessica and Daniel followed the rules, only to be discarded. Their stories are not anomalies. They are the intended outcomes of a system that prioritizes profit over people. Real reform demands more than incremental tweaks. It requires a recommitment to human dignity, fierce enforcement, and a cultural transformation that values people above productivity metrics. Only then can we say labor law truly protects the vulnerable, not just on paper, but in practice. Jessica Moore and Daniel Torres did exactly what they were told. They followed the rules. They took legally protected leave. They requested workplace accommodations, and they still ended up jobless, uninsured, and scrambling to survive. This is not just their failure. It's ours, our laws, our companies, our complacency. We designed a system that ensures the vulnerable pay for being human. If you've watched Jessica's and Daniel's journeys and felt your blood boil, you're not alone. The shock isn't just that these stories happened. It's that they're happening every single day. To millions across our country, it's easy to clap. It's harder to choose sides. 1. Share their stories. Post this video on social media. Tag policymakers. Tag CEOs. Use hashtags. #FiredForFollowing. Rules. System fails. Workers. Rights. 2. Contact your representatives. Demand federal action. A national paid family and medical leave program. Clear ADA accommodation standards. Strong anti-retaliation enforcement. Use sites like 5calls.org to make calls in under 5 minutes. 3. Support worker-led organizations. Donate or volunteer with groups like National Women's Law Center, Equal Rights Advocates, A Better Balance. Enforce the laws. We have push for increased funding to the Department of Labor and EOC. Hold agencies accountable for swift investigations and meaningful penalties. Expand protections. Advocate for the Family Act and updated ADA standards. Ensure leave is paid, universal, and covers all forms of caregiving and disability. Promote corporate accountability. Demand transparency reports from large employers on leave requests and accommodation outcomes. Boycott companies that fail to protect workers. Share resources. If you know someone at risk, share hotline numbers, legal clinics, and online support forums. Document every step. Encourage friends and family to keep records, emails, medical notes, HR communications. In a world of plausible deniability, documentation is your best defense. Organize locally host community meetings, partner with worker centers, and build coalitions across industries. Change starts at the neighborhood level. Your engagement can tip the scales. Silence and inaction leave Jessica and countless others behind. But collective outrage directed at the right targets can transform policy. Ask yourself, am I comfortable living in a country where following the law can get you fired? Or am I ready to demand a system that truly protects the vulnerable? Subscribe to Powerline Stories for more investigations into systems that fail us. Comment below with your experience or commitment to action. Like and share to ensure no one faces these injustices alone. Jessica found new work far below her skill level. Daniel remains unemployed, battling debts and health declines. Their stories don't end here, but our story can. We decide if their sacrifices lead to real reform, or if we let corporate interests win again. This is System Fails, where injustice meets accountability, and our collective voice becomes the catalyst for change. The system took their jobs. Let's take back our power.